Do you read self-help books but never apply them? Are you consuming endless motivational content but not making any changes? Then this episode teaches you how to make the switch. Welcome to the Men's Mental Health and Movement Podcast. One step stronger, live longer. Today, we're talking about the gap between knowing and doing. And that's what it actually takes to close the gap. So Allan Kleynhans today is our guest, and he starts every single morning the same way for the past 26 years, and that is being thankful. He'll be sharing his journey from a man who was once a volatile, drug-addicted combat veteran, spending his days mostly drunk and high and feeling suicidal and spending time in prison, to sharing stages with the likes of Tony Robbins, Grant Cardone, Gary Vaynerchuk, and becoming a force for good and having a great global impact. If you've ever felt like you've learned something or everything about mental health and you can't seem to fix yourself, then this is the conversation for you. This is Allan's story, and it might just be the conversation that gives you permission to finally apply the things that you know. So, Allan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me, Ben. Great to be here.
Yeah, so let's hit it off with this thing that you've been doing since October 1999. Mm-hmm. It's a practice, a declaration that you've been doing for all these years. So what is it, and what is it, this specific practice that you've been doing for the last 26 years?
Yeah, 26 years, yeah. I was in a workshop in October in 1999 in London, and I heard a guy on the stage saying that he starts his morning by saying something very specific. Good morning, it's great to be alive. Today is my favorite day. And I thought, wow, I love that phrase. Today is my favorite day. And I thought, I'm going to adopt that. And so since that day in that workshop, I've been saying that every morning. As soon as I open my eyes, I take a breath. I think, wow, it's another day. I'm alive. Good morning. It's great to be alive. Today is my favorite day. Thank you, God. I am blessed. And that's what I've been saying, every day since then. And, every morning, I don't always wake up feeling great, and yet I still say that, and because I do realize that every day above ground is another gift, and I've had some hair-raising experiences in my life, and to be grateful for another day is a real gift.
I love that. That's such a self-enthusiastic phrase, that, isn't it? Even if you're feeling a bit rubbish, it can really pep you up in the morning.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. So let's just take you right back now to when you were in your 20s. Mm-hmm. You were lost, drunk, getting high most days and suicidal. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that. You also spent time in prison, so just tell me about that time in your life and how that came about.
Yeah, I got locked up in 3 different countries in 3 different prisons for just always kind of gravitating towards the wrong side of the tracks, and I spent most of my 20s, drunk and high, and at the same time, my saving grace was that I was always studying too. I was also reading. I was going to workshops. I was living in London. I was going to St. James's Church in Piccadilly every week to listen to free talks. I was reading all about, books on mindset, on performance, and also I was very interested in how trauma affects the nervous system, because I had a pretty traumatic upbringing. And, spending time as a soldier for the South African Defence Force, it was a very, very rough time in Angola. So it affected me in a really big way. I was also very frustrated, during the 20s, because I was reading and I was absorbing all this great literature, but I wasn't doing anything with it, and that's where a lot of my frustration came from. I was very unhappy. And I was in a situation where I was working, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week by that stage, by 1999, where I was at probably the lowest point of my life, and I was really contemplating jumping under a train on a regular basis. And I would always just put a cassette tape into a machine that I'd bought back in 1999 years previously, and listen to Tony Robbins' voice say, "This too shall pass." And I would procrastinate my own suicide till the next day, and I've often joked from the stage, asked people the question, do you think procrastination, is there a situation where procrastination works? And I joke about the fact that I procrastinated my own suicide, thank God. So I was very unhappy during that time, very frustrated, and at the same time absorbing some really powerful information that, later on when I began to act on it, changed everything for me. By that stage, when I really made that decision to get sober and go to a weekend workshop that turned everything around for me, all the information that I'd been ingesting and absorbing for the previous 12 years, I began to act on it, and I created some really good momentum in a very short space of time, and I've never looked back, really. So, yeah.
That's great. That's really great stuff. I mean, procrastination can be an enemy if you're trying to get something done, like, I don't know, do the hoovering, but if you're procrastinating about your own suicide, that can be a saving grace, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Lost a lot of buddies to that, since then, and even before that, so yeah, it's a very interesting conversation that, around suicide.
Yeah.
And just last week, somebody that I know on Facebook, and somebody that I know, that I've moved to, that I know from the Robbins environment, posted something on Facebook about, just wanting to end his life, and I reached out to him immediately. And I think that kind of thing can be a cry for help. If somebody's really committed and going through with it, they'll go through with it without telling anyone. That's my experience anyway. Just all the buddies that I lost, and I never knew anything about it until it was done.
Yeah, I've lost a friend to suicide as well, and that was exactly the thing that happened. There was no indication. It just happened. So the fact that person posted it, I think that was, and you responded to that call, then great. I think you've done some good work there. So you said that your trauma started when you were very young and continued to stack through your teens. Obviously, growing up in South Africa in apartheid must have been, a bit of a different situation to how things are now there.
Yeah, it was very different.
How did that affect you?
It was very different. I think growing up as a young kid, I wasn't really aware of it. You're not really aware of it until you start to, be able to rationalize the world around you. As a young kid, you're not, growing up in that kind of environment. And it was really only when I arrived in England, in my early 20s, that I looked at South Africa and I thought, wow, we grew up in a very, very strange, paradigm, really. And, so, however, I lived next door to a police station, Tony, for the first 6 years of my life. So I was born in 66, and through to 72, I lived next door to a police station, Point Road Police Station to be exact, in a very, very rough neighborhood in my city, one of the toughest neighborhoods in my city, definitely one of the most renowned neighborhoods in the country. If you ask anybody about Point Road in the 60s and the 70s, they'll tell you it was a rough neighborhood, very industrial, very close to the docks. And living next to that police station, climbing onto the wall, looking into the yard next door through a gap that nobody knew existed except me. I saw some very brutal things that really traumatized me at a young age. And I was around the age of 4 or 5 at the time. And then a couple of other incidents, growing up in my neighborhood, seeing people get stabbed, seeing all kinds of violence, being exposed to that. I was bullied a lot as a kid. I was sent to boarding school at the age of 13. And I was an only child, so my parents were always working to give me a good education, which I never really realized until much later. And then straight from the military, straight from school into the military, 18 years of age, conscripted, was compulsory. And then I was deployed all around the country, and again exposed to some severe and very tragic and very brutal environments. And then spent 7 months in Angola in 1987. Being deployed there, and in October 87, which is just recently, I think 38 years, if my maths is correctly, 38 years ago now, South Africa was in its biggest battle, and I was in that battle, and it was pretty brutal, and so that kind of shaped me as a young man, those experiences. On top of that, from a very young age, I figured my parents didn't have any time for me. They were always working, and I was always kind of left to my own devices. I was either being looked after by a nanny, or at the golf club, left to get up to my own mischief, etc. While my father played golf and my mother played bowls. And so yeah, it was an interesting upbringing. And I think by the time I got to the point where I started to read, 7 months out of the military, I was introduced to a book called Think and Grow Rich. I'm sure you've heard of this yourself, and most of the listeners here will probably have heard of that book, Napoleon Hill's great classic work. By the time I started reading that book, without really knowing it, I had several really limiting beliefs stacked on top of each other in my own psyche, and which really meant that I had very, very low self-esteem. And so it was an interesting time. And I'm so glad I did find that book that was introduced to me. I'm so glad the whole subject of, personal development and psychology was introduced to me, because that took me on down a different path. And I began to become very, very interested in everything I could get my hands on around the subject. And it's led me to where I am today. So yeah, it's been, it's funny how we connect the dots looking back, right? But at the time, we're just trying to get through life the best we can.
Yeah. I'm interested to, I mean, obviously being conscripted, that's a difficult situation for anyone to deal with, really, isn't it? Having to go and do a job that you don't have any choice over, and then being sent into these environments. When you went to Angola and you came back, you came back with zero self-esteem. What do you feel that you left out there?
Well, I think I went into that experience with very low self-esteem already. I was a kid that grew up, being bullied. I was teased a lot. I was a tiny little kid. I grew a lot in the military. I grew quite, in height. I grew, 7 or 8 centimeters in height while I was in the military. But as a kid, I was very tiny, and I wasn't academic. So, at that time, you either made it into university if you were academically minded, and you were good at, if you wanted to study something, or if you're good at school, and then you got the marks to get into university, and then you could kind of avoid going to the military immediately. And then by the time you finish your degree at university, you would still have to go to the military while it was still conscription, but you would come in with a degree, which meant that you would become an officer. You right. kind of bypassed that. But somebody who, didn't have the academics and, wasn't, just kind of barely made it through school. I was conscripted, and then, we had all the kind of training, the basic training, etc. And then in my second year, we were then sent to Angola. And, as I say, by the time I went in there, I was already somebody who was, I was quite timid. I was just trying to, keep my head above water, really. And, however, the training kicks in when you're in that kind of environment. I had a patrol mortar pipe, 60 millimeter mortars. That's what I was, and an RPG-7. We were in, mechanized infantry. So we were traveling around in 6-wheel rifles with the 20 mil cannon on top, anti-air gunner at the back. And we were a force of 5,000 and sent into Angola. And, we fought against Russians and Cubans and localized military that were, obviously recruited in Angola. And it was pretty brutal, In our very first combat, I lost one of my mates. And so, coming back from that, I remember I was numb. I was really numb. I came back and my parents picked me up at the train station. We went home, and I walked up to my father's liquor cabinet, picked up the biggest bottle I could see, and went into my bedroom, locked the bedroom door, and just drank myself to sleep. And I did that for about 6 months. And then until my friend, bumped into me into the street, and we were walking in the street. I bumped into him. He said, "Where have you been?" I said, "Been in the military." He said, "Me too. Where were you?" And I said, "I've been all over." And he said, "Man, I've been in a helicopter. I was a medivac, and I've been flying into Angola and bringing wounded soldiers back to the military hospital here in Pretoria." And I said, "Yeah, I was on the front line of that operation." And so he took me up to his apartment, little studio apartment, and we proceeded to have this amazing conversation. And he was the one who actually introduced me to Think and Grow Rich and psychology, the subject of psychology. And he said, you need to learn how to process information, process this experience. Because if you don't learn how to process it effectively, it's going to, you could be in a lot of trouble. And I was already having nightmares, and I had them for about 9 years after that. But Malcolm, the gentleman who introduced me to that, he's sadly no longer with us. Several years after that, he was killed in a car accident. However, I often refer to Malcolm as one of my angels, because he's the one who actually put me on this path of self-education, and pretty much saved my life, I reckon.
Yeah. I mean, there's people along your life's path that things happen, and then, like you said, looking back, you're like, wow, that guy could have literally changed. To me, it sounds like he actually changed the whole direction of your life, giving you that book.
Absolutely.
And that conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a good chance I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now had he not put me onto that first book, Think and Grow Rich. And I started reading, and I thought, wow, this is brilliant. I just fell in love with the information. Then I read book after book, and it's 36 years later, and I'm still reading, and I love reading all the time.
Yeah. Great. Well, as you can see behind me, I've got plenty of books here. I'm exactly the same.
Yeah. I've got them all on the wall here too.
So you've got, yeah. So what was it then? 13 years after Angola before you went into that workshop?
Yeah,
So
87 to 99.
So you've done 13 years of learning and reading and not doing anything about it, but just learning all this information. And then that, where was that particular
I was living in London. I was living in
workshop?
London at the time.
Right.
And I was burning the candle at both ends because I was going out, Thursday to Sunday night. I was out all night and I'd go straight to work. And, I was, I often say to people that I looked a lot.
Out partying?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah. And,
yeah,
basically just, it was a way to numb myself, and I was very good at wearing a mask, Tony. I was very good at pretending that everything was great. I was the life of the party. I was funny. I was entertaining. But it was just really a mask, and I was really unhappy. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't really think I was worth much, I didn't think I was, I thought that I lacked intelligence. And one thing that really, that I do remember is that when I started reading, I started realizing that I had this great memory. I could remember these passages and these lines from these books and these quotes, etc. And that was the first time that I began to think, okay, cool, you know what, maybe I'm not as stupid as I think I am, or maybe I'm not as silly or stupid as the teachers labeled me, because I was an academic, so I had no desire or any inclination to do well at school, because I found it quite boring. My favorite subject was English, and it makes sense because I do love reading, I love words, I love language, and But during that time, I was just burning the candle at both ends. I was reading and studying, and I was working, and I was partying all the time. And it was when I went to that workshop.
So would you say that when you went to that workshop, you were like at your lowest point, basically?
Yes, I was absolutely, yeah. I got to a point where I used to call them terrible Tuesdays. I was working in a bank at the time. I was in IT. And I was working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. I was taking every overtime shift that was available. And I would come in on a Tuesday and call them terrible Tuesdays because I was coming down on a Tuesday in a hard way. I hadn't slept, since probably Thursday properly. And Monday night was really the best night of sleep I'd get because I would pass out from exhaustion. And then Tuesday I'd go to work feeling like death. And that particular Tuesday morning, I saw an advert for Tony Robbins in the paper. It was advertising that he was coming to Cardiff, Wales to run his workshop, Unleash the Power Within. And I was a big fan of his already because the first book I bought when I arrived in London in 1990, 9 years previously, the very first book I bought in Victoria Station at the bookshop there, the W.H. Smith, which is still there to this day. I bought his book, Unlimited Power, and that was my introduction to neuro-linguistic programming. And that was March of 1990. So 9 years later, I see this advert. I'm feeling like death. I was at a low point. I was feeling like suicide. I was really suicidal. I used to live in Acton Town here in West London, and anybody who knows West London knows where Acton Town is. And Acton Town is the train line for Acton Town has a boom across it, right? So the cars travel over the track, and so the boom is often up. And I used to think about going to that track, and I thought I can get on the train line quite easily. No one would even know, and I just walk all the way up the track when it's dark and catch the train while it was moving quickly, and then I wouldn't feel a thing, if I catch the train at a fast speed. And I contemplated that often, and then I would think, oh, you know what, I'll do it tomorrow. And I didn't really have the guts to go through with it, thank goodness. And but when I saw that advert, I saw it as a sign. I thought, wow, this is a sign. This guy, I've been a big fan of his work for 9 years. I've been listening to him on cassette tape. I love the sound of his voice. And, now he's coming to the UK again, and I've got to go see this guy. This could help me. This could be my last chance. Bearing in mind that I'd been to a lot of workshops over the previous 9 years and nothing really helped me. And to a large degree, I wasn't implementing it because I didn't really believe in myself. And so I got sober 4 days before I went to that workshop in Cardiff. And I had a good talking to myself in the mirror. I said, I'm going to see this guy 4 days from now. It costs a lot of money. I've got to make sure I go there sober so I can absorb the information. This is the weekend that I'm going to turn things around. And I'm going to apply myself. And that's exactly what I did. I got there. It was very intense. I loved it. I applied myself. I wrote everything down. I played full out. And that weekend literally saved my life, and I came back from there committed. I stayed sober. I joined a different peer group, and then I just began to practice what I'd been learning. I practiced every morning, those tools that I learned that weekend, and I kind of rewired my entire nervous system. And I changed my job. I changed my peer group. I changed everything, really. I became a vegan for 18 months. I gave up meat, coffee, Coca-Cola, cocaine, the whole works. And I stuck to it, I stuck to it. And yeah, it was brilliant. I signed up for every other program. I made a decision that one day, I would love to be one of his trainers. That came to fruition. And I vowed to myself, Tony, that I would learn everything Tony was teaching, and I would combine it with everything else that I'd learned over the previous 12 years. And I would take what I'd learned back to South Africa after having, made a decision many years ago that I didn't want to go back to my country because I had a lot of trauma associated to my experience there. And as a young man, and then I thought, you know what, I'd love to take everything I've learned and go back there and be part of the transition. And that's exactly what I did. At the end of 2001, I went back there, based myself there for 7 years, and did some amazing work.
I love that. Going back to the place that actually caused you all of the trauma and hurt. So let's just go back a little bit. So to that day when you kind of made that commitment, as we know, with anything on day one, making a commitment, it can be hard to make that commitment, but making a commitment on day one, because you're like, I'm doing it today. Yeah. But take me through kind of like day 100 and day 1000, how kind of the difference between that and what went off between those sort of periods, like.
Yeah, absolutely. The first day is always the hardest, the beginning is always the hardest, because I've got a group of buddies that I grew up with. We grew up in South Africa together. We grew up surfing, chasing girls, and then then when we were in London, we were riding bikes together, and we were having a lot of fun. We were going out partying together, and these are really tight buddies of mine, and I love them. And I still love them, and we've all gone on to have families and build businesses, and and we still got great friendship. And some of our, my oldest friendship is 52 years old now, and
oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, that's awesome. And however, at that particular time, because I was absorbing all this information, and I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to, back in '94, I was in a workshop, and I thought, I want to do what this guy's doing. I want to facilitate transformation. But first I need to transform myself. And I wanted to be on stage speaking, and I was also terrified at the same time. I had a lot of fear about what people would think of me. And I also had this idea that I didn't have anything to say. And so, when I eventually came back from Tony's weekend in Cardiff, and I thought, okay, cool. I've been sober now for by that stage it was about 8 days or 10 days, etc. By the time the workshop was over, and I got back from the previous 4 days before I left to go, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to stick to this now. What I need is a new peer group. And I remember what Tony said. Tony said, your environment is stronger than will. You can have the strongest will in the world, but if you're not in the right environment, your environment will eventually drag you down. So what I did was I went back to all my buddies. The following Friday, we used to get together every Friday evening. And then, I went back the following Friday. They hadn't seen me from the previous weekend, which was when I was in Cardiff. And I said to the guys, I said, listen, you won't see me for a while. There's some things I really want to do. I've been wanting to do these things for a long time. I haven't had the courage. However, I spent the previous weekend with Tony Robbins, and I want to act on some of these things now. And I really want to commit to them. So don't call me. Don't come see me. And please, just respect my wishes. I love you guys. We'll always be mates, but I really need to do this for myself. And it didn't go down too well, as you can imagine, at first. And however, I understood why it was received that way. And then I just joined a new peer group. I found a group of people in London who were fans of Tony Robbins, who used to meet once every month. And I went to that meeting every single month. I made some new friendships. And then in the beginning, it was really difficult because I happened to live on the ground floor of a building. And one of my mates, a very good mate of mine, who lived on the top floor, we always used to congregate at his apartment on a Friday evening on the top floor. So every Friday evening, I would hear my buddies arriving, and I was desperate to go upstairs and see them, right? And connect.
Coming through the door beside you.
Yeah, going through the foyer, right? Going through the communal foyer. And but I stuck to my guns. I just stuck to my guns, and it was painful, but I just said one more day. And what I was doing too, I took the tools that Tony taught at the time, and I took some of the tools in NLP, and I just conditioned them into my nervous system every single morning for 45 minutes before I went to work. I did that every single day for 13 months, and it just really rewired me. And then I remember 13 months later, was over a year later, that there was a party, one of my friend's birthday parties. I knew all my buddies would be there, and I went to the party, and they hadn't seen me in a year, and it was fantastic to go to that party and reconnect with them. And I was a different person, and they could see it. They felt it. They saw it. I was healthier. I was clean for a year, and I was on a different trajectory, and I'd created some new friendships, and I had new commitments and new projects that I was working on, and I was really committed to just applying what I had been learning, and then also sharing it with other people. I thought, I want to share this with other people, and then I started getting invited to share it, in different communities, and that's how it started there. And then it just became easier and easier. The new friendships that I developed were, they were supportive. Those were people that really were also fans of Tony and personal development in general. It was a great group of people that I tapped into. I also had another mastermind that I joined every Friday. We would meet every Friday evening and spend 4 or 5 hours together at one of my friends' apartments in London. That was another great supportive environment. And so these new friendships, these supportive environments really just, they fueled me. They fueled my commitment. And it just became easier and easier, easier and easier. And then obviously with the practices that I was practicing on a daily basis, it became my new identity. I really just reconditioned my identity.
Your new identity, yeah. So how did, just curious, how did friends, when you went back after that year, what was their feedback? How did they welcome you and speak to you?
They were warm. We've been buddies for a long, long time. They, we have a deep love for each other. And even though at that time there was still some ego involved, etc. However, we've all gone on to create great lives, and we've all got kids, and we live in different parts of the world now. Some of us have moved around to Australia, New Zealand, America. Some of us are still in South Africa, and we all very, very close still. We still connect on WhatsApp. We've got group chats, and I love these guys. Some of my friends even came to my workshop that I started running in South Africa. So some of the friends that I grew up with eventually were sitting in my workshop and got a tremendous amount of value out of what I was sharing at the time and my own content. So I feel very proud of that. Not everybody loves personal development the way I took to it. Even in my own family, I had some of my own family members sitting in my workshops, and I often joke that I'm probably the black sheep of my family, the one that was just different, and didn't go the same way as everyone else, or doesn't think the same way as everyone else. And I just I try and explain that to people. I put it down to the fact that from a very young age, I couldn't quite understand it myself or explain it, but I just had a deeper knowing, because I'm a very spiritual person, and I started studying spiritual psychology, and that's my passion, and I share that, and I teach that, I studied quantum physics, and I believe that everything is energy, and that we are energetic beings. Even though we feel solid and everything around us is solid, we live in a 3D experience. Everything is moving. Everything is in motion. Everything is atoms, molecules, and electrons. It's all moving at different speed. And so there was a part of me that I knew that, although I didn't quite understand how to explain it when I was younger. And the more I started studying, and the more I started understanding it, the more I became adept at being able to communicate it. And I think I knew that even from a young age, even from the age of 4, when I was next door to that police station, I knew that something wasn't quite right, and I was going to have a part to play in being part of of transforming, people's consciousness, of helping people to understand that, you can transmute fear into love. You can transmute pain into your passion, and that everything has a reason. There's a reason for everything. And a story pops in my head very quickly, and I tell you, I'll never forget. 30 years to the month, October 2017, I was in Angola in October 87. And October 2017, I was touring Russia. And I was on a 12-city tour. And I was, doing a day workshop, a full day of training and content. And I remember 3 different cities, Tony, 3 different men came up to me in the break and said, thank you for telling your story. I was in Angola in 87. I was fighting against you, and I'm so glad you're still alive.
Fighting against you.
Wow. It blew me away. And only one of them would let me take a selfie, because the other two were still military. But all 3 of them said the same thing. they all said along the lines of, you know, you telling your story so transparently makes me realize that my family doesn't even know who I really am, because I built a wall around me, and they don't really know that part of that side of me, you know, because I'm afraid of what they'll think of me.
Yeah.
And so that really, you know, that blew my mind. You know, I think about, wow, you know, 30 years later, I come full circle. I meet 3 guys who were in Angola with me in '87, and we were against each other, and now we can stand and hug each other, and we have a good cry together, and we talk about the fact how we're so grateful to be alive, you know. And
that is amazing, isn't it? Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
It is amazing. That's amazing.
It's mind blowing, right? I mean, I think, wow, God or the universe has a great sense of humor, right, to make that happen.
What a way to you know, complete a circle, as it were.
Yeah.
You know. So, you've studied with, like, obviously some of the biggest names in personal development, like Tony Robbins, and now you're one of his elite trainers. Yeah. But as you just said before, you've developed your own methodology, which is called the Awaken principle. Is that right?
Yeah, Awaken is my workshop. Awaken, yeah, and I talk about how we can, you know, it's about how you.
Yeah. So what's the core principle of that?
Yeah.
If you can tell me about that.
Yeah, the core principle is knowing that you are actually a soul or a spiritual being having a temporary human experience. You know, we are all energetic beings. We are all, you know, if you look around and anything that's solid, this desk, you know, is solid. Our laptops are solid. You know, everything is solid. However, if you look at these solid objects under very high-powered microscope, you'll see that they are 99% space, right? They're just moving. And you know, if you look, there's nothing there. And you know, so we live in a 3D experience. So my workshop is really helping people to understand that even though we're having a 3D experience, you can also have a 5D experience at the same time. You know, 5D is really just coming at life from a perspective of love, from coming from a place of from living in your heart rather than living in your head. You know, and that's, you know, there's that old adage or that phrase about the longest distance to travel is from your head to your heart. And that can be the hardest journey to make, you know, when your 3D ego is intent on being right. And we all have moments where we're intent on being right, you know, and really the cost of being right is love. And so it's, you know, if through my experiences of growing up in South Africa and the trauma that I experienced, you know, the biggest gift that those experiences gave me, and especially Angola, was compassion. I had to learn how to be compassionate with myself. I had to learn how to forgive myself for what I did in Angola. And, you know, using a mortar pipe and an RPG-7, you know, is on other human beings, whether you call them the enemy or not, they're other human beings, right? And we are not, our natural essence is not designed to take another life, right? And so, and to make things worse, Tony, I had to sign a document saying that I would never be able to talk about it ever again. And there's a documentary that's just about to come out, actually, called The Unspoken War, about Angola and about South Africa's part in Angola. And, you know, carrying that with me for so long, it really kind of, you know, it ate me alive from the inside. And when I began to accelerate my own healing process, which was after that workshop I did with Tony, and when I really began to apply what I was learning, and I thought, okay, cool, you know, I'm really going to have to learn how to forgive myself, you know, and because I went to a religious school, you know, and I went to Sunday school, and I had a lot of religious dogma shoved in my head at a young age. So I came out of Angola thinking, oh, now God doesn't even love me, right? There's no coming back for me.
Yeah.
So that process, you know, that healing process, which has taken, you know, the better part of 36 years now, is especially the last 26 years, you know, is really allowed me to develop a deep compassion, not only for myself, but other people. So I help people to understand that, you know, you're a human being as well as a soul. You know, your soul's in a human body, and so your soul's always yearning for love and expression and expansion, and yet your 3D ego is about, you know, separation and controlling everything and making everything, you know, feel safe, and always looking out for what doesn't feel safe, and always, you know, it's always looking for danger. So it's how do we move through life in a way that just allows us to experience even more love, even more heart, even more compassion, even more forgiveness, even more connection. And so that you can look at other people and not see difference, but really just recognize that actually what you're looking at is another expression of one soul. this energy that exists in everybody. So that's really what my work has been about, and yeah, it's.
I love that. That's a great philosophy. I love that, and it almost reflects exactly what you were saying right at the beginning, where you say, like about accepting today. I love you, I accept you, I approve of you, to yourself, and saying that to other people, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we go through every day. There's going to be opportunities to forgive yourself, because every day you're going to be triggered into your ego, and I always say to people is, how quickly can you come back to your heart? How quickly can you give up being right? Because if you can give that up, the quicker you can give that up, it's like building a muscle, just, because really at the end of the day, when you're right, you're making someone else wrong. And people feel that, right?
Yeah.
People, you can't accept somebody, you can't love somebody if you're judging them. And people feel when they're being judged, and that creates resistance, that creates friction, that creates, like an impasse, and when there's an impasse, you can't arrive at a new understanding, you can't arrive at a new answer.
Absolutely. So you've with this, that workshop and many other things that you do. You've worked with like the Springboks, Sharks, rugby team, high performing business people, financial traders. What's the common thread in these high performers that you think makes them struggle mentally?
I think for people just generally, whether you man or woman, or however you were brought up, our biggest challenge is the inner critic, is this little voice in our head that is always telling us that we're not enough, that there's always something, there's always more. And as being a father myself, I made a vow that when I knew I was going to be a father, I made a vow that I was going to bring up my kids in a very different way to the way I was brought up. My parents were very strict, they're, God rest their souls, two beautiful people that I realized very late on in life that were, just wanted the best for me. And, when I became a father and then I saw my parents around my children, it was so great. We developed, it's like we became friends for the first time, and I suddenly had, these amazing parents for the last 10 years of their life. And I would have loved to have had that experience from very, very early on. And I realized that they were doing the best they could based on their consciousness level, and their own experience, their own upbringing, their own wounds, their own, traumas. And so, as parents, we don't really, there's a lot of books that have been written about being a parent. However, we tend to pass on our own beliefs, our own values, our own fears, our own desires.
Yeah.
And what that generally does for all children everywhere is they develop this inner critic, and it's about trying to be recognizing that you're not enough, that, or having this critic, that's constantly, comparing you to other people. So, I remember when working with the Sharks, it was a fantastic experience, because I was this kid who loved rugby and played rugby as a kid at school and that. I grew up watching these guys and, and thinking and going to the stadium, watching rugby in my 20s, early 20s, and thinking, wow. And here I was then standing in front of this team, 25, 26 of these guys, and, 8 Springboks in that team, and thinking, wow, I'm standing in front of the Sharks. I was having 2 conversations. I was sharing with them this powerful tool that I knew could help them, and that did help them. They had a fantastic season that season. And when we started working together, they were at the previous season ended at the bottom of the log, and then went to the final at the end of the following season. And I made some great friendships, and worked with some of the Springboks one-on-one, and it was fantastic. And just very driven, very capable, very talented guys, very strong, very powerful. And at the end of the day, we all still have that little voice in our head, am I good enough? Am I good enough? And
even though you're standing there actually doing the thing, you're still questioning yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now your mission now is to love and serve anyone who crosses your path every day.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So that's a radical shift from where you were, self-destruct version of yourself.
Yeah.
So, what does that look like on a daily basis for you?
Well, my highest value is love. So I remember in 1999 when I went to a workshop, the second workshop that I went to with Tony, and after I did the first one, I enrolled in all the other programs, and then I went to a workshop in Palm Springs, and I remember we in that particular workshop, we talked about your identity and, how your identity forms and what supports your identity. And I realized that my default emotion throughout my, especially at that time of my age, I was 32 at that time. And my default emotion, through my mid-20s into my late 20s and my early 30s was anger. That was my default emotion. I was always angry and frustrated. Right. I was volatile. And so I thought, well, you know what do I really want? I really want to feel loved. I really want to be loving. I want to be a loving human being that feels love on a regular basis for myself and other people. And I want to be able to show that love easily without worrying about how it's going to be received and without feeling rejected. And I, then looking at my youth, I grew up as a kid who felt unloved by my own parents. And then coming out of the military, I thought, well, even God does love me now, because I've done, I've committed one of the ultimate sins was thou shalt not kill. So I thought, well, how can I become a loving being? And so I began to work on that. And I used to walk around all the time just saying in my head, I am love. I'm a loving being. I love easily. I feel love easily. I give love easily. I receive love easily. It was very, very strange at first, but I kept reciting that to myself over and over and over and over. And so, now fast forward, all this time later, 26 years later, love being my highest value. Yeah. So my goal now is just to be kind, to be kind to myself, to notice when I'm being unkind to myself. And then it makes it easier to be kind to other people. And I always tell people the same thing. I think if you can practice kindness and self-love, then it makes it easier to do it with other people. So I recognize that everybody I meet is fighting their own battle. You don't necessarily have had to go into Angola like I did. We're all fighting our own war in between our ears with ourselves. And so I always remember that. I always try and remember that everyone who crosses my path is probably fighting a battle that I know nothing about. So how can I make them feel better? How can I make them smile? How can I interact with them? I always ask people their names. I talk to everybody, and people who know me will tell you the same thing. I always talk to people, and I like to connect with people because I want to make sure that, it could very well be, I know that it could very well be that they haven't really had any good connection with anybody, in recent, it could be that day perhaps, or maybe they had a bad morning, or they could have fallen out with someone they love and they might be feeling really bad about that. And so I just want to make a difference to them in some way, shape or form, in any way I can.
So last couple of questions now. So if, for instance, if someone's listening right now and they're in that frustration phase like you were, where you were doing all the learning and not implementing, and they've read the books and they know what they should be doing and stuck in that phase, what's the one thing that you'd tell them?
One thing I'd tell them is that everything is always on the way. Nothing is in the way. So, we have this idea that, that things are in the way and we can't get past them. And so I tell people is that, everything is kind of a stepping stone to a better view. And, that life is happening for you. So you always have another chance to start again. This will pass. This moment's not going to last forever. So you can restart any time again. You've always got the next moment to try again, And so the first thing to do is to have some compassion with yourself and to recognize that you're not going to get it right all the time, and cut yourself some slack. And if it's tough, then, the first place to start is, okay, how can I just let some steam off with myself? How can I cut myself some slack, and then you just start again, because it's always on the way. It's not in the way. This moment that you're stuck with right now is not in the way. It's on the way. It's on the way. So, we just all on the way somewhere. We've come from somewhere and we're on the way back to somewhere. So while we're here, let's make the most of it, And so that means being kinder to yourself, cutting yourself some slack, recognizing that you're just a human, right? You're doing the best you can. And also I remind people too, and I remind myself too, we're all just making it up anyway. Nobody really knows what they're doing. We're just making it up as we go.
Yeah. So one last question for you. The motto of this podcast is one step stronger, live longer, as you can see on my t-shirt. So
yes,
what would that mean to you?
One step stronger, live longer. What it makes me think of is that I made a decision to myself a long time ago that I was going to live to 120, right? And I'm going to make sure that I want to slide into my grave sideways thinking, whoa, what a ride. That was amazing. So, I think living longer and living stronger is just really about not being so hard on ourselves. I think, our biggest problem comes from when we are placing, expectations on ourselves and people around us.
And remember that life is just, life is meant to be enjoyed. Life is meant to be fun. Life is meant to be you're meant to laugh a lot. You're meant to enjoy it. If we can stop being so serious and remember that, the people who live longest are the people who have the most fun, the people who laugh the most, people who love the most, people who, don't take things so seriously. So, stress is a self-induced, paradigm that causes us a lot of pain, And so, I would say that your motto reminds me of that, is one step stronger, live longer. Living longer means not being so stressed, enjoying life more, smelling the roses.
Love it.
It's good to have an outcome. It's good to be focused. It's good to, want to achieve things, but at the same time, you also got to take time to enjoy the journey and enjoy the process and smell the roses on the way.
Absolutely. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. What a great conversation, a great insight into your life and the things that you do, Allan. So if listeners want to find out more about you, about your workshops or anything like that, we'll put the links in the show notes, but where can they find you?
I think the easiest place to find me is on Instagram or Facebook. Instagram is probably better. So if they wanted to follow me there, then I'm always posting stuff there, and that's the best place to find out about what I'm doing. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Listen, thanks so much for that. And one step stronger, live longer.
You too, my friend. Thank you very much for having me, Tony. It's been great.
I really hope you've enjoyed this episode and found some value in it. If you have, remember you can like, subscribe, and leave a review. And it will really help to get this message out to more listeners who need to hear these kind of conversations. Thanks, and don't forget, one step stronger, live longer.